Welcome to the presentation titled Tier Chart 101. My name is Josh Mueller and I currently serve as the Sports Club Assistant at CSU Monterey Bay. My intent is to provide you with a bit of background and insight into the tier chart system that we utilize for the sports club organizations at CSUMB. Here's our agenda. I have two example tier charts that we will be covering. And then here are the three main points of this presentation that I would also like to cover. One being intent by design of the tier chart, why do we use it, and how clubs can use it. I'll share that I've served in this position for the past 3 years. During that time, I've had the opportunity to observe the different stages of development that the tier chart has experienced. We will see two examples on the next slide, which will help illustrate this point. So, tier chart 2019-2020 and tier chart 2020-2021. And as you can see, the one on the left, tier chart 1920, was written for a year in which our clubs were on campus and we were offering in-person programming. Then 2020-2021 is the year that we went virtual due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As you can see, there are differences in the two tier charts. The main reason for this being that we were no longer allowed to do any in-person or on-campus programming, and everything was based on virtual platforms. As such, we made adjustments and we rewrote the tier chart to reflect what our clubs were currently facing. We essentially rewrote the requirements that they needed to meet in the perspective that they were no longer going to be able to do things in person. At the same time, we were looking to encourage our clubs to remain active and again provide them with guidelines of what a successful club in that situation would look like. We do approach this document as a working model. After a careful review, the SEC Executive Board and advisors generate recommendations to guide the placement of clubs for the upcoming year. With the approval of the Sports Club Council representatives, the tier chart is then enacted for the year that it is proposed. There is an opportunity to request a revised recommendation should the club feel they have compelling evidence to make a move either up or down from the recommended tier. The tier chart, along with the SEC Constitution, serve as the governing documents for our member organizations as we conduct our business throughout the academic year. So, needless to say, it is of vital importance that you are very familiar with the requirements for the tier that your club is in, and you have a plan to meet those requirements successfully by the deadlines that are placed on them, and so that you don't have any issues with your status as a club and you are fully eligible to receive all the support that is offered by meeting those requirements. Let's get into our first topic of discussion, the intent by design. And there's one giant question that is always asked in regards to the tier chart, and I'll place it here. What purpose does the tier chart serve? Well, I can illustrate that in 3 different points. And first, it provides structure and a clear pathway to development. We use 3 tiers to make it easier to see the difference between them. We also generate a large enough gap between tiers that it requires adequate planning and development to successfully move upward and take on higher levels of responsibility. Second, we use it to ensure a fair and equitable standard of evaluation. Now please, do not misunderstand the term equitable to mean equal. Equitable is defined as fair and impartial. That is not the same as equal, which is something to remember later on when we talk about the distribution of financial resources and the allocation of facility use. And finally, we use the tier chart to develop a method of distinction between clubs who are at different stages of life cycle. Each club must determine the level of competition they're looking to provide the CSUMB student community. This is by far the biggest factor in determining what tier is considered most appropriate. For some clubs, attending and competing for national championships is the goal, while others only want to focus on personal skill building or have performance-based events that are not considered competitions in a traditional definition. All active clubs who are recognized student organizations are eligible to receive support, financial or otherwise. The clubs who demonstrate their greatest need and serve the largest number of students are distinguished for those efforts and receive a greater portion of available resources in order to support that higher level of need and performance. Here are some of the reasons that you may consider moving tiers and you would find them supported. One way to decide if you might be ready to advance a tier is because your club has joined a national governing body, also known as a league, in order to expand the level and the scope of competition that you face. Another reason might be because you now have one of these three guys on staff. Now, not likely, but maybe the club now has a certified coach, which makes them eligible to join a higher level league or join a league in general and represent in a more competitive manner. Finally, there has been growth in the league, and now there are more opportunities for attending and hosting competitive events for your club. You may also find your club in a position to scale back their scope of operations due to changes in the dynamic of the club roster or league standing for the current season. It would be appropriate to identify the situation as early as possible and inform the SEC Executive Board that your club may need to move to a lower tier that would better match the position of the club. There is no penalty for doing so, and it is highly recommended that every year the club conducts an internal review regarding the club status and how that matches with the requirements that are provided by the tier chart. Identifying the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of your club are key components to successful organizational operations. Now, if you need more detail about that, I suggest you contact a classmate who's a business major and ask them about the SWOT, S-W-O-T, analysis model. They'll definitely be able to fill you in on the details. Of course, there are reasons why moving up a tier is attractive, but may not be the best option, and these would include, but are not limited to, the following. You want more money to spend on your club per year, but have not grown or exemplified the need for additional funds. Another reason could be clout chasing, basically trying to maintain a status without the ability to meet the requirements. It's the classic example of overpromising and under-delivering, which should be avoided at all costs. And finally, there is a capital project of interest for your club that is essentially a one-time funding need, greater than what a funding proposal would be able to accomplish in your current position. I'd advise that you work with your SEC advisors to explore all possible sources of funding available. You may be able to source the funds without the additional requirements expected of your club, which comes with moving from a lower to a higher tier. Another commonly encountered question is regarding the certified coach requirement. I can say that this has changed frequently from year to year, and we are promoting a higher level of coaching whenever possible for obvious competitive and safety focused reasons. The level of expertise is not always readily available or comes at a price higher than what the club can afford. So we have made small adjustments to increase the scope of potential candidates to fill the position of coach. What you may experience is that most NGBs and regional governing bodies will require this to be considered an eligible club in order to join. I can say from personal experience that coaching certification is not focused so much on providing game theory or game planning techniques, as much as it centers around safety, fairness, inclusion, and proven techniques for sharing knowledge of the sport. Oftentimes, student coaches are not given the respect their position should receive. And this can lead to generating hostility that in turn can carry over to other aspects of student life. Um, due to academic or employment demands, it's not always possible for a student coach to attend all away competitions, which can negatively impact the team. And finally, having a centralized and designated authority figure can reduce much of the peripheral animosity that can occur in the competitive environment. So let's talk about violations, or another way to state it is going out of bounds. Um, a simple way to view this is in the following. If you fail to maintain your lane, you may receive a citation or some other manner of extra attention from law enforcement. That's certainly something we want to avoid, right? Well, let's put it in a sports analogy. There's penalties awarded for infractions. In many sports, when you go out of bounds, it's an immediate turnover of possession to the opponent. And that's really crucial because in most sports, if you don't have possession of the ball, you can't score. And if you can't score, then there's no chance of winning the game. Sometimes the way a penalty is assessed is immediate. Other times it requires a review before the penalty is confirmed and the judgment is handed out. Now, at times, you may even lose resources as a form of penalty, as can be seen here. That might include players being sat out for a certain amount of time. That might be players who are ejected from the game. They may be suspended for a number of games. Your club may be sanctioned. It may be subject to fines. There may be legal actions. It all depends on the nature of the infraction and the penalty we're talking about. But needless to say, this is similar to the outcome of not meeting a required element of your current tier chart position. You may be placed on probation. Your club may be finding themselves in a probation status. The club may lose access to funding, such as the base operating funds or funding proposals. Or you might even lose access to a facility to hold your practices and host your games. It may take time to process, but if the review shows evidence of not meeting a requirement, then more than likely a penalty is going to be handed out. So let's talk about the two different types of funding that are available to active clubs in good standing. First, well, let's go over the acronyms. BOFs is Base Operating Funds, and FRP stands for Funding Request Proposal. And what's that supposed to mean to me? Well, the base operating funds is meant to provide immediate funds for operational needs. An example of this would be maybe paying league fees for your club membership, purchasing equipment that you need to start the season, maybe host an early season game, pay for travel expenses, pay for tournament fees, or even be used to buy fundraising supplies that will provide a return on investment for the club. Your club may end up facing a financial burden that is greater than what is currently available in the club account. That's when a funding proposal may be useful. Oftentimes, these are similar expenses as to what the base operating funds are used for, just in greater amount, or maybe after the initial funding available has been exhausted. Other examples of funding request proposals include jerseys, equipment, traveling hosting expenses, maybe paying for tournament fees, even facility rental and stuff like that. The funding caps are present to ensure that there is a set amount of funds available for all clubs throughout the academic year. Of course, all the funds that are not utilized end up going back to associated students, and we're not guaranteed to receive the same amount the next budget year. That's why we encourage clubs to consider requesting funds when appropriate, as their clubs continue to grow and develop both in roster size but also in the scope of their operations. It's never guaranteed, but only after there's been an adequate amount of time provided with no indication of need or of use. Then we remove the caps, the funding caps, and allow for either a greater amount to be proposed or possibly for even a second proposal to be submitted from a club who's already previously been awarded funds. And with that, I hope that after watching this video, you have a better understanding of how to successfully interact with the tier chart. Should you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at the following email address, sec@csumb.edu. I want to thank you for your time, and I hope you all stay well.